Good afternoon, everybody. Pastor David. Press forward with courage, that we will enjoy celebrating a life well lived, and that for those of us who are family and friends, we can enjoy some beautiful memories of someone we've loved and lost. Be with each family member here, each friend. Comfort them in their grief, sustain them in their loss, and encourage them as we look forward to um, the second coming. In Christ's name, amen.
Sing with me. Children of the Heavenly Father, safely in His bosom gather, nestling bird nor star in heaven, such a refuge e'er was given. God His own does tend and nourish, in His holy love they flourish. From all evil things He spares them, in His mighty arms He bears them. Neither life nor death shall ever from the Lord His children sever. Unto them His grace He showeth, and their sorrows all He knoweth. Praise the Lord in joyful numbers, your protector never slumbers. At the will of your defender, every foeman must surrender. Though He giveth or He taketh, God His children ne'er forsaketh. Is the loving purpose solely to preserve them pure and holy.
One little quick announcement before I get started. The guest book in the back got here just a little bit late, and the family would like to ask if you did not get to sign it, if you please would at the conclusion of our service today. Mary Marlene Davis was born at home, 1624 24th Street Northeast, right here in Salem, Oregon. She was born June 27, 1933 at 11:30 p.m. She was the fifth of what would ultimately be 6 children born to John Harold Davis, the city engineer, and Velma Cruz Davis. The first 2 children, girls, died shortly after birth, and they were never forgotten by the family. Mary always sadly referred to them as her baby sisters. This happy family was to include 4 children who grew to adulthood: an older brother, Edwin, older sister, Joyce, and a younger brother, Glenn. Mary was a precocious child. When she was learning to talk, evidently she could not stop talking. You get it, honestly, Randy. Her grandfather, John Franklin Davis, called her Mary Marlene the Talking Machine. Kind of has a good ring to it, doesn't it? Mary loved her dad, and her brother Glenn was her constant companion. As preschoolers, their dad would come home from work for lunch, and he would always give Mary and Glenn a penny, which they would take to the store to buy candy. You really could buy penny candy back in those days. When Mary reached school age, she was enrolled at Inglewood Elementary School that she attended there grades 1 to 3, and then she transferred to Livingston Junior Academy for grades 4 to 9, then located on Broadway Street. When in elementary school, 2 features of Mary's personality became evident, actually 3. The first was her love for games. Mary used to tell me that whenever she had any spare time during elementary school, she used it to play jacks. All right? In fact, games occupied much of Mary's spare time throughout her life. The second was her love for anything active. For instance, her neighbor, Mr. Bunn, would use his stopwatch to time how fast Mary could ride her trike around the block. The family would sometimes go to Cape Kiwanda, where Mary would go to the top of the sand dune there and run down it as fast as she possibly could. She was even known to have gone swimming at Neskowin Beach in November. Those of you that are native Oregonians, you know that takes some moxie. I tried it once when I was 25 in July, and that was a lifetime work for me. Her favorite toys were the little plastic animals that came in Kool-Aid packages, and she had a toy electric stove which would actually heat up, and you could bake little things on it. Another feature of Mary's personality was that she kept everything. At her death, she still owned all those little Kool-Aid animals. She still owned the stove. It still heats up. All right? After finishing the 9th grade at Livingston Junior Academy, Mary went to Laurelwood Academy for her first semester of her 10th grade year, but she decided she would rather go to Columbia, and so she transferred to Columbia and graduated there. Columbia had a huge impact on Mary's later life. Many of her lifelong friends were people she met at the academy. One friend was another Mary Davis, who, because there were 2 Mary Davises and they were roommates, began to go by the name of Mary Lou. And they were actually roommates their senior year. Her other roommates at Columbia were Lorena Cook Lee for her 10th grade year, Joanna Freeman Minder, her 11th grade year, and, of course, we've already mentioned Mary Lou Davis Sweets McMillan, her senior year. These and many other friends would be lifetime friends for Mary. One of the most important people of her life there at Columbia was a fellow named Morris Yaw. He noticed Mary first, and he began to send her little notes in class. And in the style of that time, they were folded up in a very special little neat way that you would fold notes to pass to your boyfriend or your girlfriend. And Mary, who had it entered into her senior year yearbook that her life's ambition was to be a housewife. She wasted no time in fulfilling that ambition because she graduated Columbia Academy on Sunday, May 27, 1951, and on Monday, the 28th, she married Morris Young. Her attendants at Columbia were all fellow Columbia students except for the Bible boy who was the son of a neighbor of hers in Salem. They left the church for a honeymoon at the beach in a 37 Chevy. Cool car for you car buffs out there. In January or February of the next year, Morris was drafted into the Army due to the Korean War. He took his basic training at Fort Lewis, Washington, and then he went to military schools at Fort Ord in California, Huanchuca City in Arizona, and finally to Atlanta, Georgia. Mary followed him to all of those places, of course, except for, of course, Fort Lewis and Washington for his basic. In Atlanta, Mary remembered that she applied to work as a telephone operator in Atlanta, but they didn't hire her because they didn't understand how she taught. I know you Oregonians don't think that you have an accent, but take my word for it, you do. By the time Morris left for Korea, Mary was pregnant. Mary had reached her first goal of becoming a housewife. Her next goal was to have 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls. Mary was on her way to achieving that goal. On the last day of 1953 camp meeting at Gladstone, Mary began to go into labor. Her mother decided to take her back home to Salem, but her younger brother Glenn had misplaced the family car keys. So they had to borrow a car from her older sister Joyce and her husband Chuck to get Mary back to Salem. That night, Mary went to the hospital and was in labor for 36 hours. At the end of the 36 hours, her first child, Cheryl, was born, July 27, 1953. Outside of Sherry being born, it was also the day that the armistice ending the Korean War was signed. I've always told Sherry that the day she was born, peace broke out in the world. When Mary's brother Glenn came to meet Mary at the hospital and see his new niece Sherry, he asked Mary if she had heard that the war in Korea was over. And in Mary's way, she said, "No, I've been busy." More children were to follow. Another daughter, Donna, came along on January 6, 1957. The thing that Mary always told me about the birth of Donna was that she was such a pretty baby that her sister Joyce, who had decided to stop having children after Kathy, Karen, and Steve, decided to go back into production. And this was the catalyst for Nancy being born, followed by Mike and Jason. So, Nancy, Jason, Mike, I want to ask you, what if Donna had been an ugly baby? You can thank your lucky stars. She was a good-looking baby. All right. Mary had her 2 girls. Now it was time to start on the boys. Her son Scott was born on November 9, 1958, and Scott was to be the source of Mary's greatest heartache when he died all too soon at age 30 in 1989. The hardest thing that anybody has to face in life is the loss of a child. Mary wasn't a woman given to a lot of displays of emotion, but most of the times that I ever saw Mary cry was on Scott's birthday, the anniversary of his death, or when we went to the cemetery to visit Scott's grave. His loss was the greatest pain of her life. My wife, Sherry, always prayed that her mother would not have to see the loss of another child. God answered that prayer in the affirmative, for which we are grateful. Mary's second goal in life was reached with the birth of her second son, Randy, born March 16, 1961. This pregnancy was difficult for Mary. She spent most of her 9 months in bed. When Randy, 7 months. When Randy was born, he only weighed 3 pounds and 8 ounces, which made him at the time the smallest baby to ever be born in Salem and live. He was so small that when Mary brought him home, she had to borrow Sherry's baby doll clothes for him to wear. Randy really looked cute in those Barbie outfits. Actually, the outfits were a little bigger than Barbie dolls. With 4 children to raise and to send to church school, Mary needed to find work outside the home. Her husband, Morris, was already working 2 jobs, so Mary began to work with little short times off between children. Her first job here in Salem was for the state. She worked at the tax office. Most of Mary's working life was the loss prevention officer, first for Payless and then for Ross IGA grocery stores. Mary was excellent at catching shoplifters. She saved both of her employees a lot of money and drastically cut down on the number of thefts. Her work was kind of tough, however. Several times she had fingers broken by shoplifters who resisted arrest. Once, Mary told me that she stopped a man and asked him to empty his pants pockets. She had seen him pocket a little piece of jewelry in his pants pocket. So the man took his pants off and handed them to Mary and said, "Here, you check." I guess he thought Mary would be put off by that, but she just took the pants, reached in his pocket, pulled out the piece of jewelry, and handed him his pants back. Sometimes a gentler approach was necessary. A common theft at Ross grocery store is that people would go grocery shopping and they would stop by the produce department, pick up a batch of grapes, and eat them while they were shopping, then throw the spine behind some cans on a counter. Mary would go up to them with the weight and the price of the grapes, hand them a little slip of paper and say, "Be sure and pay for those when you check out." Once, Mary was up in the catwalk watching, and a man picked up a greeting card. He walked out of the store with it without paying, and so Mary went out to the parking lot to apprehend him. And when just before the man got to his car, she saw him go and turn around and run back to the store to pay for the card he had absentmindedly walked out with without paying. Mary let him go. He never knew how close he came to being arrested. Because of her work, Mary carried something in her purse that probably most of you ladies don't have: a pair of handcuffs. Mary and Morris worked hard, putting 4 of their children through Livingston Junior Academy and Laurelwood or Columbia Academies, and 3 of the 4 through college. Life wasn't all work, however. There were many times of recreation as well. There were numerous trips to Nesquin Beach. Mary loved saltwater taffy. There were vacations to Mexico and Canada, a yearly trip to visit the Yaw family in California, a vacation to Yellowstone National Park, trips to Montana and Nevada. All of these were fondly remembered by Mary and her children. Another yearly activity in Mary's life was camp meeting at Gladstone. The Yaw family rarely missed one of those camp meetings, staying in those tents you used to have at Gladstone, where you had the wooden base and put the tents on top. They had their regular cabin they had every year. I joined the Yaw family in 1976 when I married Mary's oldest daughter, Sherry. Mary was 43 that year. I remember Mary as a vivacious person who loved to swim and hike. Mary was the keeper of the keys for the gym at Livingston Junior Academy, and I remember plenty of Thursday night volleyball games over at the gym. Sherry tells me that Mary actually sometimes went 3 times a week with some of her friends. Evidently, she cut back when I came to town, and we only went on Thursday nights. I spent hours with Mary working puzzles, playing dice, 5 crowns, Racco. There were Saturday night rook games with the Blodgetts, the Tompkins, and the Goldens. There were lots and lots of Scrabble games with Sherry and Donna. Mary was great to travel with. We went on trips to Vancouver Island. When she came to the Carolinas, we took her out to Kitty Hawk, Cape Hatteras, Mount Mitchell, Grandfather Mountain, and also a trip to Williamsburg, Virginia. Mary's first grandchild, John, was born in November of 1980. Sherry and I decided to spend that Christmas with the Yaw family here in Salem so that they could meet their new grandson. We all had a great time, and I have always been glad we spent that Christmas here because it was to end up being the only time that the entire Yaw family would spend a Christmas together, at least the last time. The next year, after years of growing apart, Mary and Morris separated and later divorced. With every loss, there are some gains. Several things stick out in my memory about Mary during those years. The first was Christmases. Mary was able to spend Christmas with Sherry and I in the Carolinas during much of the 80s and 90s. Often Donna and Randy were able to come and spend Christmas with us, and those were really great times. We had plenty of good food because Sherry and Donna both are excellent cooks, and Mary got to be with her grandchildren. 2 more grandchildren were added in the 80s, Catherine in 1984 and Michael in 1988. If you were to survey the Huskins family, they would all agree that some of those Christmases were the best Christmases of our lives, at least so far. Another highlight of Mary's life during those years happened in 1993 when Randy took Mary on a month-long trip to the Orient. They traveled to Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Hong Kong, and mainland China. In China, they went to the Great Wall, which is always a must-see if you go to China, but they got a bonus there because the Vice President of the United States at the time, Dan Quayle, was also there, so they got to see, was he former at that time? Got to see him there, too, at the Great Wall. In Hong Kong, Randy took Mary to the Shangri-La Hotel. It had been rated the #1 hotel in the world. And they decided to eat brunch there. When Mary saw the prices, she wasn't real sure she wanted to eat there, but Randy insisted, and afterwards Mary always said it was the best meal she ever ate. Another trip Mary got to take during one of her visits to the Carolinas was that we took her to Washington, D.C. She got to see many of the sights there. The one that sticks out in my memory was our tour of the White House. I obtained tickets so that we could take a tour, and we had to wait on a series of bleachers outside the gate of the White House. And as it often happens in the South, in the summertime, you'll get an afternoon shower. Now, showers in the Southeast are not like rain in Oregon. In Oregon, it sort of is a heavy fog. But in the South, when it rains, it's like standing under a fire hydrant. So here he is. We get this shower. We get about 2 inches of rain in an hour, and now it's our turn to tour the White House, and we are soaking wet. Not exactly the way you want to go to the White House. 2001 was a momentous year in Mary's life, and that was the year she married Milton Christensen. For the next 20 years, Chris was to bring much joy and happiness to Mary's life. Not only that, but all of Mary's children took to Chris right away. He became a very, very beloved part of our family. Not only is Chris a really great guy, but he could give us all, including Mary, a run for our money in 5 crowns. Both of them owned houses which were sold to buy a house together on Ivory Way here in Salem. That was to be a place where many, many happy memories were made. In addition to that, Chris had an RV and a ski boat, and there were a lot of nice, happy vacations to places like Salem Lake and Pineville Reservoir. Also, for a number of years, Mary and Chris took their RV and headed to Desert Hot Springs to meet with other retirees and, of course, play games. In 2007, Mary's youngest grandchild, Michael, graduated from Mount Pisgah Academy, and so Mary and Chris came to the graduation ceremony. That day of the graduation, camp meeting at Carolina started, and so Mary, being a lover of all things camp meeting, decided to stay for Carolina camp meeting. Now, I know that you Oregonians are very proud of your camp meeting at Gladstone, and it is one of the great camp meetings in the North American Division. Carolina also has a fabulous camp meeting. In fact, we really ought to call it Carolina Resort Meeting. It's on this beautiful lake up in the mountains of North Carolina, and the accommodations are superb. It's just a beautiful resort area. It's located on Lake Junaluska, and I believe it's the prettiest setting for any camp meeting in the North American Division. For over 30 years, Sherry and I have been able to rent the same house, which has a big screened porch in front, about 12 feet wide and 40 feet long, right overlooking the lake. There's a series of decks that goes down to the water, and we have our own boat dock. And Mary and Chris saw that, and they were hooked. So, not only was Oregon camp meeting part of their regular routine, but for most of the years after that, they came to Carolina camp meeting as well, with just a couple of exceptions. One of the exceptions was in 2013, when Chris's granddaughter, Jessica, invited them to go to London, England, where she was living at the time. They had a wonderful time there, seeing the sights of London, and then they were able to take a ferry trip across to Denmark, where Chris's parents had been born. Chris had never got to go back to his parents' home country, and so that was a very much beloved part of the trip. The other exception was not so joyous. 2015. Mary and Chris loved to go to the senior center in Kaiser to play bingo each week, and one day, while at the center, she was knocked down by a large curtain divider that was being rapidly closed. This injured Mary's back, and forever after, she had trouble walking. She and Chris missed camp meeting that year, but Mary recovered enough to come to our timeshare condo at Myrtle Beach that September. Looking back on it, it was the beginning of the end for Mary, though none of us knew it at the time. But before I get into that, I want to break the narrative for a moment and tell you one other thing about Mary that was very important in her life, and that was service for others. Back in the 60s, Livingston Junior Academy was having a fundraiser. I am not real sure what it was for, whether it was to pay off the debt at the school back here at Livingston, or if they were raising money to build the gym. But at any rate, for Mary, money was in short supply. She had 4 kids to raise and feed and educate, but she wanted to help. So Mary would go to work every day. When she came home, she would eat supper, and then she would go to a farm and catch chickens, which she would put in cages to be sent to the processing plant. The money Mary earned from that second job went to Livingston. Another time, Mary caught a man stealing groceries. And when she arrested him, she realized that the reason the man was stealing was because he and his family were hungry. After work that day, Mary went and bought a week's worth of groceries and took it to the house of the man she had just arrested so they could eat without having to steal. When Mary retired, she still wanted to contribute to making people's lives better. So for over 20 years, Mary and later Chris volunteered every Monday and Tuesday mornings at the Salem Adventist Community Service here on Summer Street. That was a big part of their retirement life. After Mary's fall at the senior center, her ability to walk gradually became worse and worse. Even though she was hampered by this, it didn't kill her spirit. When I retired from ministry in 2018, Sherry and I were able to take Mary and Chris up to Kentucky to see the recreation of Noah's Ark. And Mary just really enjoyed that. That was one of her bucket list items. Mary was having trouble getting around, but she never complained. She was always a great trooper, good to travel with. And even though moving was difficult, she had to get around by that time with either a walker or holding on to Chris's arm. Later that same year, Sherry and I took Mary and Chris up to Vancouver Island, British Columbia, and took her to visit Butchert Gardens. Mary enjoyed that trip. Pretty soon, she could not stand or walk, which landed her in rehab. Mary was motivated because this separated her from Chris. COVID-19 even kept them from being able to visit one another for a while, and that was particularly difficult. So she tried very, very hard so that she could transfer from her wheelchair to bed, etc. It was during this period of Mary's life that family really came through for Mary. Donna spent endless hours on the phone arranging health care, taking care of business, trying to get her and Chris into an assisted living. She took care of a lot of family business, selling the car and getting the house sold. Donna's husband, Dwayne, along with Chris's children, Janelle and Vinny, contributed by helping pack up the house and moving things up to Portland. Janelle even gave Chris a place to live at her house for a while so Chris could be close to Mary at the rehab center. I hope that those family members can look back with much pride and satisfaction in years to come, knowing that they did all they could for Chris and Mary when they needed it. Sherry and I particularly appreciate it. She and Chris were finally able to move into assisted living center in Portland. They were at Cherrywood for about 4 months when on a Wednesday, March 10 of this year, Mary broke her leg trying to transfer from her wheelchair to the bed. This led to her going to the hospital and having surgery the next day to repair the leg. Mary seemed to get through that all right, but on Sunday, March the 14th, she was eating breakfast and she just collapsed. They tried to revive her, but it was unsuccessful. Mary died at 8:30 a.m. Pacific time, like I said, March 14th. If I can add my own personal tribute to Mary, I always thought that I had the perfect mother-in-law. If you do research into families, you'll find that many times in extended family, the least favorite person in any family is the mother-in-law. It's the reason that you hear so many mother-in-law jokes. None of them applied to Mary. In the 45 years that I was privileged to be a part of the family, Mary never once complained or criticized or admonished me or told me how I should raise my children. She never spoke a harsh or critical word to me once in 45 years. Heaven knows there were times when she rightly could have. When Sherry and I became in-laws ourselves, we chose Mary as the kind of in-laws we wanted to be. The only thing that makes parting from Mary anything but miserable is the blessed hope that we Christians have of one day reuniting with those we have loved and lost. And that's the reason the words of the Apostle Paul are so beloved by all of us who have lost loved ones. It goes like this: brothers, We do not want you to be ignorant about those who fall asleep, or to grieve like the rest of men who have no hope. We believe that Jesus died and rose again, and we believe that God will bring with Jesus those who have fallen asleep in him. According to the Lord's own word, we tell you that we who are still alive, who are left till the coming of the Lord, will certainly not precede those who have fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a loud command, with the voice of the archangel and the trumpet call of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. After that, we who are still alive and remain will be caught up with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will be with the Lord forever. Therefore, encourage each other with those words. Mary loved God. She loved you, Chris. She loved her family. She loved her fellow man. What higher tribute can you give anyone than that? We have a couple of moving mics, I think, handy. The family uh, would like to invite any of you who have memories of Mary and would like to share them to take just a minute or so, and we will do that before we're dismissed. Anybody have something they would like to mention?
I grew up in this church, and my mom was just wonderful. She was always so funny, and if nobody was like somebody was playing a game, she'd go, "Maybe I'll stop you 100 times and start laughing," because she knew it was really good. Mary was very energetic and she was reactive. And she had a lot of in the building area. No, 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 I'm fine, I can do it. She was and so she allowed that. But she was always very nice to everyone, and people were, you can you get going. It would help you with that you could get to a little bit of everything. And she was just super I love it being around her. She would always go to the food room and she was there, and then she shared what she could say, and then she would go to the meeting. So it was always just overflowing, and I was able to.
What else? Right. Okay.
Hello, I'm Patty, and this is Scott. Some of the memories that we continue to have, we know we've been in this event, something that we love. One of the things that we so really appreciate is that another thing that I have this year, my own mom, who was the second, she didn't consider it what I mean, because Mary was their word, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
One of my earliest memories with Mary and with Mary is she smacked the drum. I always knew Mary was sports fine and was drum. I don't know how she did it. She did it in public. She just smacked Ricky. Also, I know that she loved playing games with Brooke and Jasmine Knight, and she loved playing Scrabble with her mom. But one thing that was very special, they looked a little tough before they played. What is that? But they enjoyed themselves. One thing I really appreciate about Mary, and Mom Pat, Mary never forgot when we had birthday parties.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve. Anyone else? All right. I guess you're up. Bye.
Sometimes I hear strange music like none e'er heard before, come floating softly earthward as through heaven's open door. It seems like angel voices in strains of joy and love that swell the mighty chorus around the throne above. Oh, sweet celestial music, heard from a land afar, the song of heaven and homeland. Through doors God leaves ajar. Now soft and low and restful, it floods my soul with peace as it Amen.